Yeah, good day, everyone. Welcome to the next topic in literature, which is poetry. Today we shall look at poetry. It is one of the most awesome genres of literature. One of the most awesome, even though it is usually one of the most scary. Yes, why? Because for some people they feel it is quite complex and complex to understand when you read, as well as complex to put together. As much as literature, as much as poetry can be difficult to put together, it is exciting to read it. It is exciting to understand its deep messages. It is the most emotional of all of the genres of literature. What a prose is going to achieve with 300 pages of lengthy writing, a poem of 3 lines is going to say the same thing. Imagine that. What somebody uses 300 pages to write, you can achieve that as a poet with just 3 lines. That is as deep as poetry can be. It is one of the most powerful form of writing anywhere in the world. And so, poets are known to be passionate. They are deep. They are deep thinkers. In many cases, they are philosophers. They are known to be very intelligent. Poets are known to be very entertaining when they talk and when they write. Usually, poets are orators. Little wonder the great Martin Luther King Jr. was such a powerful speaker. He was a poet, yet he was one of the most amazing orators of his time. He gave speeches that moved people and moved mountains. He was the one who said, I have a dream that my 3 little children will not be judged by the colors of their skin, but the content of their character. So content of character, by the way, uses alliteration, which is a key element of poetry. So poetry is what we're about to talk today. There are different kinds of poems. Different kinds. I shall try to make you understand and appreciate the different kinds of poems that we have. The first is lyric. Lyric. Of course, some people call it lyrical poems or lyrical poetry. This kind of poem refers to one which is rhythmical. This refers to a poem which is rhythmical. So when your poem has a very sweet rhythm, when the rhythm rises and falls so beautifully, you can call such a poem a lyrical poem. A lyrical poem. One example is this poem, My Mother, which goes thus: my mother, who sat and watched my infant's head when sleeping on my cradle bed. You can see that this is rhythmical, very sweet to the ears. And I'll also give an example with this popular poet's poem. This poet called Ife Paul. He has a poem that goes thus: when the revolution spoke, the comedians couldn't joke, even the rich felt broke. Did you hear that? Rhythmical. So when the poem has rhythm, it falls under this. There's a poem by Bob Eckhart that goes thus: revolution we must sing, chant it in the ears of kings. Let it flow with the wind and bring swing to all things. Did you hear it? There's a rhythm to this. So when a poem has such beautiful rhythm, you call it a lyrical poem. It is from this word that we have rap today. Raps are lyrical. So it is from this that you have the word lyrics. Lyrics of a song, lyrics of a rap. So you can see, and that is why it is said that poetry is the mother of all art forms. Poetry is the head of all genres of literature. Let's go on. The next we shall talk about is song or song lyrics. I put musical here. It means this kind of poem is a musical poem. So any poem that you can convert to music, or at the point where a poem becomes music, then that music falls under these song lyrics. There are many songs today that began as poems. There are many songs. Songs by writers like Alicia Keys are poems. They're not just songs. They're not just music. They're poems. Poems. Songs from Asha. I don't know if you know her. Asha. They are poems. They're not just music. There's a musician I know also and like, Aduke Edaoto. These are musicians that write poetic lyrics. So when the lyrics or the lines of a music emanated from poetry, or emanate rather from poetry, then you can qualify such music as this, or such poems as this. Let's go on. The next is narrative poem. Simply, a narrative poem is a poem that tells a story. Some poems tell stories. Some poems tell stories. I have a poem that goes thus. Let me tell you a story about a man who sought glory. He was a man who lacked. So when a poem tells stories, that poem is narrative. The fourth is dramatic poem. A dramatic poem is a poem that seems like drama. It is a poem that flows in a conversational manner where there are characters and these characters communicate in the poem. It is drama but in poetic form. Such poems can be staged in real life where you have characters performing the poems to audiences in theater. It can be beautiful. Ode is the next. An ode is a poem of exaltation. You know what it means to exalt somebody, to praise somebody. It can be an ode to your father. You can write a poem praising your father. You can write a poem praising God. You can write a poem praising Allah, praising Muhammad, praising Jesus. So when a poem exalts a person or a theme, that poem is ode. Now we shall look at pastoral poem. Pastoral poem, from perhaps the word pasture, which of course this kind of poem deals with shepherds and rural life. Shepherds and rural life. It is a rural kind of poem that considers those issues that rural people go through. When the word rural is mentioned, rural, it means native. It refers to people in villages that, of course, perhaps can be shepherds. Perhaps a poem is written about herders, Fulani herdsmen, and the way they live their lives and the hardships and turbulence that they go through. The poem based on such kind of people is called pastoral poem. The next is pastoral elegy. Pastoral elegy. This poem is about death and rural life. Death here and rural life. When the poem is about rural people who are perhaps shepherds, and these native or rural people suffer a loss of life, or somebody dies in that poem. You know, such a poem is called pastoral elegy. This kind of poem has a very, very sober mood, because there's sadness. You know, I mean, of course there has to be sadness where the issue of death comes to play. So it's a very sad poem, but then the setting of the poem is rural, it is native. The next is ballad. Ballad is a kind of narrative poem which usually is passed down from generation to generation. You know, we have narrative poems that normally tell stories and they are quite extensive. Ballads are usually not written. Perhaps you would have heard of this piece of recitation. Tinini tanana biko biko maila shebina sokoto iyanapus. You know, this is a poem, but it never, I mean, I'm not sure it has ever been written, but from generation to generation, Nigerians have been using it to do guessworks. And people have learnt it. I have never seen it on paper. I've never seen it written. So this is passed down as part of orature. Yes, now we shall go to sonnet. Sonnet. Sonnet is a very special kind of poem. Very special, because it is mathematical. It is perhaps the only mathematical poem in literature. You know, so what is sonnet? Sonnet refers to a 14-lined lyrical poem written in iambic pentameter. Yes, I mean, it's what we call iambic pentameter. This is, so the basic elements of sonnet is that, first of all, it is a lyrical poem. It's a lyrical poem. It usually has 14 lines. For a poem to qualify as a sonnet, it must have 14 lines. It must be a lyrical poem, and it must also have iambic pentameter. These two are easy to understand, but what is iambic pentameter? First of all, meter here is the rhythm established in a line of poetry, usually determined by syllables and stresses. Meter refers to a rhythm created using stress patterns, meaning you have stressed and unstressed syllables in a line of poetry. Also, what is iamb? Yeah? This here is a foot or unstressed syllable. What is pent? Pent refers to 5. So what this means here, with the use of pentameter, is that you have a line which contains 10 words, but the 10 words are broken into 5, 5. 5, not, I mean, you have a line of poetry which contains 10 syllables, not 10 words, 10 syllables. But in the 10 syllables, you have 5 stressed syllables and you have 5 unstressed syllables. I hope you're following. Yes. This here is an example. If you check what we have here, you will notice that this line or these words here are 10 syllables. Do we read? The light, the sun, forlorn, one day release. If we count, you'll see. The light, the sun, forlorn, one day release. That's 10 syllables. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So what iambic pentameter means is that you must have 10 syllables, and in the 10 syllables, you'll have 5 unstressed syllables and 5 stressed syllables. So if you check this well, I've broken every word here into 2. The first syllable here is unstressed, so I intentionally put it in small letter, while the second syllable is stressed, so it is in capital letter. The light, the light. The light is stressed, light is stressed. D is unstressed, sun is stressed, the sun, the sun. 4 is unstressed, lawn is stressed, forlorn. So you see, side by side, stressed and unstressed syllables are put together in 10 portions to give you iambic pentameter. Yes, you have unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, up to 10. Another example is this of iambic pentameter. Shall I compare thee to a sun, to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? When you look at the syllables in the words of this line, you'll notice that some syllables are unstressed while some others are stressed. But in total, we have 10 syllables here. Shall, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, shall unstressed, shall I. The I is stressed. Compare. The com is unstressed and the pair is stressed. D to. The D is unstressed and the to is stressed. So, in any poem which has 14 lines written in iambic pentameter like this and like this, you should know that that poem is a sonnet. One poet who was a master of sonnets was Shakespeare. He was a master of sonnets. He wrote over 100 poems in sonnets. Over 100 poems, I think 141 or thereabouts, I've forgotten. He was such a master of sonnets. It is mathematical. It is not easy. It only takes a master of poetry to produce a piece as this. One more time, let me read this. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Beautiful. We shall continue shortly. Now we shall look at epic poem. An epic poem is a narrative poem that has a central figure who is a hero. It means that it is narrative to the extent that it is telling a story. An epic poem tells a story about somebody who is a hero in that poem. And the language of an epic poem is elevated. It is made to seem extraordinary. Like there's a poem by J.P. Clark on, I think it's Ziggy Zaga or something like that. There's another poem on Shaka Zulu. Shaka. You know Shaka in South Africa, who is a warrior. Let's say a poem is written about his heroic exploits. You know, so when a poem is centered around a certain heroic figure, which tries to elevate and make this heroic figure seem larger than life, such a poem is an epic poem. Now we shall look at haiku. Haiku is first a Japanese poem. It is a Japanese poem. Also, it has only 3 lines. Haiku has only 3 lines. The first and the third lines have 5 syllables. The first and the third lines have 5 syllables. The second line has 7 syllables. 7 syllables. And you must note one thing. In haiku, the lines don't rhyme. It means there's no use of rhyme in the writing of this kind of poem called haiku. And one other thing you must note is that the aim of haiku in its Japanese origin is to paint a fair picture of the world. It is to paint a fair picture of nature. It is to promote the image of picture in the minds of people. So usually haiku writes about nature. It writes about the world. So this kind of poetry is for natural progressiveness, to make the world seem good in the eyes of people. But you must take note of these features of haiku. The next poem we shall look at is Limerick. Limerick is a very funny, very humorous poem which has 5 lines. Just 5 lines with the AABBA rhyme scheme. AABBA rhyme scheme. What this means is that the first, second, and last line rhyme together. First, second, and last line rhyme. While the third and the fourth line rhyme together. You know, it can often be called a nonsense poem or rhyme scheme because it looks disjointed and its humor technique may be vulgar, yes, maybe a bit offensive, but the aim of limerick is to evoke laughter. But it is strict on its rhyme scheme such that first, second, and fifth line must rhyme together, and the third and the fourth line or lines must rhyme together. That's it. Quiet. Quiet. Now we shall look at Villanelle. Villanelle. This poem has similarity with Limerick. It has similarities, yeah? But then it has 19 lines. 19 lines, of which the first and the third lines rhyme. The first line rhymes with the third line, and of course the last 2 lines also rhyme in Villanelle. Yes. I mean, these last 2 poetry styles or kinds of poems are not popular. Yeah, but they are kinds of poems, and you need to know them. Now we shall look at lullaby. Lullaby is any poem which is used to lull children to sleep. It is any poem which is used to put little ones to sleep. You lull a child to sleep. For example, when the mother sings, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are," to a baby, to make that baby sleep, that poem is a lullaby. So it is any poem used by parents or older ones to make a baby keep quiet or sleep. There's a very popular Igbo poem. I mean, I'm not Igbo, so it's hard to get the words right, but I'll try. Onye mamena neba kwa, onye na nema neba kwa. You know, when this song is sung, when this poem is recited to children, they stay quiet, they enjoy the rhythm, and unconsciously they fall asleep. That's lullaby. The next is panegyric. Panegyric is basically a poem of praise. Panegyric is a poem of praise. It's a poem which is meant to praise a certain individual for perhaps the great deeds of that individual. So when you write a poem to praise an individual that you admire or that has done something great, it falls under panegyric. panegyric. We have three kinds of poems left. The first here is blank verse or free verse. A blank verse or a free verse is a poem which does not have rhyme or rhymes, or it's a poem with irregular rhyme pattern. So any poem you read which doesn't have rhymes at all is called blank or free verses. Some poets tend to like poems like this because it doesn't stress them. It can be mentally stressful or tasking to be looking for rhymes in the poem that you write. But for some people, it comes natural to them. So when you look at your mental disposition or capacity and realize that it can be stressful to put rhymes in the poems that you write, feel free to do away with the rhymes. But then if you realize that rhymes come naturally to you, then use them. I must tell you, rhymes can make your work beautiful. But your poems can still be beautiful even without rhymes. The next is dirge. Dirge. This is a poem packed with emotion. It is a poem with extreme sadness. It is a poem usually rendered at funeral. It is a poem written for somebody who is dead. So there's a lot of passion packed in it. When somebody writes a poem that he or she intends to render or dedicate to a dead person, that poem is a dirge. And like I said initially, it is usually packed with sadness because it is a way of pouring the anguish in the hearts of the writer on paper. So, and it is for reasons like this that some people say poetry is the painting of pain on paper. Lastly, we go to traditional poem. Traditional poem here is used in reference to poems that have their origins in Africa. Any poem written here in Africa, perhaps about Africa or perhaps about the cultures of Africa, is African poem. But aside whether the poem refers to Africa or writes about Africa, if a poem is written by an African person, that poem is called an African poem. Like I am an African poet because I live in Africa, I am an African, so any poem I write is going to be referred to as an African poem. Other African poets include J.P. Clark. Yes, he was a poet, so poems from him can be tagged as African poems. Efe Paul Azeno is an African poet. Sage Hassan is an African poet. Uche Uwadinachi is an African poet. So any African, including you, when you choose to write a poem, such a poem will be an African poem. Now, thank you. We've come to the end of this part of the class. I do sincerely hope that you understand everything that we have said. I'll see you in the next class.